She was shot while fleeing. A cowboy caught her as the bullet dropped her to the dirt. The sun had just started to rise over the dusty town of Red Rock, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was the kind of morning that made everything look peaceful and calm. But for those who lived in the town, peace was often only an illusion. People in Red Rock were used to the slow rhythm of life, where everyone knew everyone else, and each day was filled with hard work on the ranches, small shops, and dusty trails. It was quiet now, but that calm often hid dangers, and today was about to prove that. Leela Thompson stepped out of her small wooden house at the edge of town. Her hair, dark and tied in a simple braid, shimmered in the early sunlight. She was only 21, but there was a determination in her eyes that made people take notice. Leela had grown up on her family's ranch, learning to ride horses almost as soon as she could walk, and she knew the land like the back of her hand. Every morning, she performed the same routine, feeding the animals, checking the fences, and helping her mother and father with chores. But even in the routine, there was a spark in Leela that hinted she wanted more than the quiet life of Red Rock. She dreamed of adventure, though she would never say it out loud. This morning, like most, began with the smell of fresh hay and the soft lowing of cattle. Leela walked through the yard, greeting each animal as if they were old friends. Her favorite horse, a strong chestnut mare named Daisy, neighed as she approached. Leela smiled, patting her neck gently. "Morning, girl, ready for a ride?" she whispered. The mare seemed to respond with a soft whinny as if she understood every word. Leela's family lived on the outskirts of Red Rock, close enough to the main street to hear the distant sounds of people, but far enough to enjoy a bit of privacy. Her father, Henry Thompson, was a sturdy man with a calm, steady presence. He had taught Leela almost everything she knew about ranch work, from repairing fences to understanding the ways of the land. Her mother, Clara, had a softer touch. She spent most of her days in the kitchen or tending a small garden, but she also made sure Leela learned the values of kindness and resilience. On this particular morning, Leela was preparing for a short trip into town to sell some eggs and butter her mother had made. It was a simple task, but one that gave her a chance to leave the ranch for a little while and observe the world beyond her family's land. She packed a small basket carefully, making sure each egg was safe and secure. The sun had climbed higher now, casting long shadows on the ground. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the few trees scattered around the ranch. As she adjusted the straps of her basket and mounted Daisy, Leela felt a strange chill run down her spine. It wasn't cold, it was a feeling, a sense that something was off. Perhaps it was nothing, just the imagination of a young woman used to being aware of her surroundings. Still, she shook the feeling off and nudged Daisy forward. The mare moved with a grace that Leela loved, her hooves kicking up small clouds of dust on the dry dirt trail. The path into Red Rock was familiar to Leela. She had traveled it countless times, yet each journey had its own small adventures. Today, birds chirped in the trees, and the distant sound of a river trickling could be heard. Children's laughter floated from the edge of the town as they played near the general store. It was an ordinary scene, one that made Leela's heart feel light. She waved to a few neighbors along the way, people she had known her entire life. Life seemed safe and simple, but danger often comes when least expected, and the quiet days of Red Rock were no exception. Unbeknownst to Leela, a group of men had been passing near the outskirts of town for the last few days. They were outlaws, a small gang with a reputation for robbery and mischief in towns not far from Red Rock. Most townspeople had only heard rumors of them, stories told in hushed voices around the fireplace. Leela, however, was completely unaware of their presence, focused only on her chores and the basket in her hands. The trail began to narrow as Leela rode farther from the outskirts and into a stretch of open land. Tall grass swayed in the wind, hiding small rocks and dips in the ground. Leela urged Daisy to keep a steady pace, her eyes scanning the horizon for anything unusual. The morning was quiet, almost unnaturally so. There were no birds, no laughter, no distant sounds of life, just the crunch of Daisy's hooves against the hard earth. Leela's unease grew, but she told herself it was nothing. Maybe she was just imagining things. Suddenly, in the corner of her eye, she saw movement. At first, she thought it was the wind making the grass sway differently. Then she noticed a figure, partially hidden behind a clump of bushes, moving in the same direction as her. Her heart skipped a beat. Leela pulled Daisy to a slower pace, trying not to make it obvious that she had seen someone. She looked again, and the figure seemed to disappear as quickly as it had appeared. Leela shook her head, trying to calm herself. "It's probably just another rider," she murmured. But the instinct that had kept her safe on the ranch for years was telling her to pay attention. She glanced behind her and felt a knot of tension tighten in her stomach. Something wasn't right. Despite the growing sense of unease, she continued on, telling herself that nothing bad would happen. Red Rock was her home. Her parents had raised her to be strong and cautious, but also kind and trusting. She wanted to believe in the safety of her town and the people in it. Daisy seemed to sense Leela's tension as well, her ears flicking back and forth nervously. As they moved along the trail, Leela's mind wandered. She thought about the market in town and the people she would see. She thought about how much she enjoyed helping her mother in the kitchen, how satisfying it was to see the results of their hard work. She thought about the future, about the possibility of exploring beyond Red Rock one day. Leela had dreams, quiet ones, but dreams nonetheless. The morning wore on, and the sun climbed higher in the sky, beating down on the dry earth. Sweat began to bead on Leela's forehead, but she barely noticed. She was lost in thought, enjoying the rhythm of Daisy's movement beneath her. Every so often, she glanced around, half expecting to see someone following her, but the trail seemed empty. Little did Leela know, the danger she sensed was closer than she thought. The outlaws had been watching, waiting for the right moment. They knew she would be alone on the trail and saw an opportunity. But at this moment, Leela was unaware of the shadow looming behind the safety of the hills. She was just a young woman, riding through the morning sun, unaware that her life was about to change forever. Her thoughts drifted again to the quiet of her home and the comfort of her family. She smiled faintly, thinking of her father's deep laugh and her mother's gentle hands. The world felt safe, familiar, and warm, but the feeling of security was fleeting. Somewhere behind the grass, behind the distant trees, eyes were watching her. The calm morning of Red Rock was about to end, and Leela's courage would soon be tested in ways she could never have imagined. And so, with the sun rising high and Daisy's hooves kicking up dust, Leela Thompson continued down the trail, unaware that the ordinary day she had begun would soon become the most extraordinary and dangerous one of her life. Leela had barely gone a mile down the trail when she began to feel a strange heaviness in the air. The wind that had been gentle in the morning now carried a faint sense of tension, like a warning whispered across the tall grass. Daisy's ears twitched constantly, and the mare's movements became sharper, more alert. Leela tightened her grip on the reins, her heart beginning to beat a little faster. Something was different, something was wrong, but she could not yet put her finger on it. The trail curved slightly, and the horizon opened up into a wide expanse of open land. The town of Red Rock was still visible in the distance, a cluster of wooden buildings and chimneys releasing soft wisps of smoke. It should have been a reassuring sight, but instead, Leela felt a tightening in her chest. There was a flicker of movement in the far corner of her vision. At first, she thought it was a stray rabbit or a tumbleweed, but as she glanced over her shoulder, her stomach dropped. She saw them, figures, half hidden by the undulating grass, moving in the same direction as her. Fear prickled along the edges of her mind. Leela had heard stories of outlaws in nearby towns, but she had always thought of them as distant trouble, something that happened far away from her quiet life. Now, the danger was no longer a story, it was real, and it was close. Her pulse quickened, but she knew she had to remain calm. Panic could make the situation worse, and Leela was not one to let fear take control. She urged Daisy forward, hoping to put distance between herself and whatever, or whoever, was following her. The mare's hooves kicked up clumps of dry dirt as they picked up speed. Leela kept her eyes ahead, focusing on the path that led to town. She reminded herself of the lessons her father had taught her. Always know your surroundings, never let fear paralyze you, and trust your instincts. Her instincts were screaming at her now, but she forced herself to think clearly. The figures behind her did not make any sound at first. Leela could not see their faces, but she could tell they were riding horses like her, moving with purpose and determination. It was not a playful chase, it was something far more serious. She felt her hands grow clammy on the reins, but she could not slow down. Red Rock was still a long way off, and every second mattered. As the distance between herself and the unknown pursuers shrank, Leela's mind raced. She remembered the small pistol her father kept in the cabin for emergencies. She had never used it herself, but she knew where it was. If things went badly, she might have to defend herself. The thought made her stomach twist, but she pushed it aside for the moment. Survival came first, and thinking about confrontation too early could be dangerous. The trail narrowed again, this time flanked by thicker brush and a few scattered trees. Leela's speed made it difficult for Daisy to navigate safely, but the mare moved with surprising agility. Every step was measured, as if she understood the urgency of the moment. Leela could hear the faint rhythm of the other horses behind her, the hooves striking the hard ground in a steady, almost menacing beat. The sound sent shivers down her spine. A gust of wind brought the faint scent of smoke. Leela's mind immediately raced. A campfire? Were they camping nearby, waiting for her? She forced herself to stay focused, keeping Daisy moving steadily. The figures behind her were now closer, their forms more defined. Leela could see the glint of sunlight on what appeared to be metal guns. Her heart hammered in her chest. She had never been this close to real danger. The chase had begun, and there was no turning back. Leela urged Daisy to move faster, weaving through the uneven trail. She could hear her own breath, sharp and quick, and Daisy's hooves pounding against the earth. The open land stretched before her, dotted with rocks and dips that could trip a horse if she wasn't careful. Leela had to balance speed with caution. One wrong step could send them both tumbling to the ground. She thought of her family back at the ranch. Her parents would be worried, but there was nothing they could do. She had to rely on her own skills and on Daisy's strength. Leela had faced challenges before, repairing fences in the middle of a storm, calming a frightened calf, but nothing compared to this. Every second felt stretched, every breath heavier than the last. The pursuers were not giving up. Leela could hear the sharp shouts now, words she couldn't quite make out but filled with menace. The sound of their voices brought a surge of adrenaline. She forced Daisy to pick up even more speed, the mare responding with a burst of energy. The wind whipped past Leela's face, stinging her eyes, but she kept moving forward, determined to reach the safety of the town. As they reached a small rise in the trail, Leela could see more of the landscape ahead. The open plain extended for hundreds of yards, a mix of tall grass, scattered rocks, and low shrubs. It was a risky area. If she fell here, there would be nowhere to hide. But there was also hope. She could see a small grove of trees further ahead. If she could reach it, she might be able to find temporary cover and think of her next move. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden noise behind her, a gunshot. The sound cracked sharply in the quiet morning air. Leela felt a jolt of pain shoot through her shoulder, and Daisy shied violently, almost throwing her off. Leela clung to the reins with every ounce of strength she had, whispering reassurances to the mare. "Steady, girl, steady," she murmured. Fear surged through her, but she refused to give in. Her legs pressed against Daisy's sides, urging her forward despite the pain. The adrenaline was enough to keep her moving and her mind focused on the goal: reach the grove, find cover, survive. Every instinct in her body screamed to run, to escape, and she obeyed without hesitation. The outlaws were relentless. Another shot rang out, closer this time. Leela could feel the wind from the bullet brushing past her, a chilling reminder of how close danger really was. She ducked slightly, trying to make herself a smaller target, even though she knew it might not be enough. Daisy's pace did not falter. The mare seemed to understand the urgency, racing over the uneven ground with surprising skill. Leela's heart pounded, and every sense was heightened. She noticed the subtle changes in the terrain, the small dips where a misstep could be disastrous, the rocks that could trip Daisy, the tall grass hiding hazards. She navigated each obstacle with care, her focus absolute. She could not afford a single mistake. Finally, the grove of trees came into view. Leela pushed Daisy harder, urging her toward the small cluster of cover. The trees promised temporary safety, a place to regroup and think. But as they approached, Leela realized that reaching it would not be easy. The open plain leading to the grove was still hundreds of yards long, and the outlaws were closing in fast. She gritted her teeth, her body tense with effort. The wind burned her eyes and every muscle ached, but she did not slow. She whispered to herself a mantra against fear: "I can make it! I can make it!" Daisy responded, muscles straining, hooves pounding the earth, refusing to give up. Leela's determination was matched only by the mare's strength. The distance closed quickly, and for a brief moment, Leela allowed herself to imagine reaching safety. Just a few more strides and the trees would shield them. Just a few more steps and the immediate danger might be behind her, but she knew better than to hope too soon. The outlaws were persistent, and one wrong move could undo everything. As she reached the edge of the grove, Leela took a quick glance behind her. The figures were closer than she had hoped, their faces partially visible now, twisted with determination. Her pulse raced even faster. She had made progress, but she was not safe yet. She urged Daisy forward, weaving between the trees, trying to create obstacles between herself and the pursuers. The grove provided some cover, but not enough. Leela could hear the rustling of horses entering the edge of the trees, the voices of the men calling out. She needed a plan, and she needed it fast. The trail had narrowed again, and the terrain was uneven, but she refused to give in. She would not be captured. She would not give up. Every sense was heightened, every nerve alert. Leela could feel her heart in her throat, could hear Daisy's rapid breathing, could sense the danger closing in from all sides. But she also felt a flicker of hope. She was still moving. She was still alive, and as long as she had breath, she would fight to survive. The chase was far from over. The morning sun had risen high in the sky, but it could not illuminate the fear, the adrenaline, and the courage that now filled Leela Thompson's heart. She was running, yes, but she was also thinking, surviving, and refusing to surrender. The events of this morning had transformed her ordinary ride into a battle of skill, courage, and instinct. And though she did not know it yet, this was only the beginning of a day that would test every ounce of her strength. Leela felt her legs straining as Daisy carried her across the uneven ground. Her body was tense, every muscle ready to react. The outlaws were closer than ever now, their shouts and the pounding of hooves echoing through the grove. Leela could hear the metallic ring of guns at their sides, glinting in the bright sunlight. Her mind raced, trying to think of a way to escape, to survive, but there was little time. Suddenly, one of the outlaws fired a shot. The sound cracked sharply in the air, louder than anything Leela had ever heard. Pain erupted in her shoulder, sharp and burning, and she stumbled in the saddle. Daisy reared for a moment, her panic nearly throwing Leela to the ground. Leela gritted her teeth, clinging to the reins with one hand, pressing her other hand against the wound, trying to stop the blood that was already seeping through her fingers. Time slowed. The world seemed to blur around her, the green of the trees, the brown of the dirt, the golden sunlight, all blending into one overwhelming, dizzying mix. Her vision tunneled, and a wave of fear swept through her. This was the moment she had dreaded, the one she had imagined in the back of her mind during quiet days at the ranch. She might fall, and the outlaws would catch her. But she could not give up, not now, not when Daisy was still moving, still fighting for her survival. In the chaos, Leela heard a voice, a shout, not from the outlaws but from someone else. A new presence, close and strong, entered the grove. She didn't have time to fully understand who it was, but instinct told her that this person could help. A sudden pair of hands grabbed her as Daisy stumbled from the shock of the gunshot. Leela felt herself lifted from the saddle, caught mid-fall, the ground rushing up to meet her. Pain radiated through her shoulder, and her breath came in short, sharp gasps. The hands that held her were strong and steady, firm yet careful, ensuring she did not hit the dirt. She realized she was no longer in immediate danger from the outlaws. The new figure had intercepted her just in time, shielding her from a fate that could have ended everything. When Leela's vision cleared slightly, she saw him. A tall, broad-shouldered man dressed in worn but sturdy clothing, a cowboy hat shading his face from the sun. His eyes were calm but sharp, scanning the surroundings with precision. He had arrived at the exact moment she needed him most, a guardian she had never met but who seemed to understand the urgency of the situation. "Hold on," he said, his voice steady and commanding, as if the world could not shake his resolve. "You're safe now." Leela clung to him, her body trembling with pain and relief. She felt the warmth of his arms around her, steadying her as Daisy slowed to a cautious trot nearby. The mare nickered softly, sensing that her rider was no longer in immediate danger. Leela tried to speak, to thank him, but the words caught in her throat. She was breathing hard, both from the exertion and the sudden shock of what had just happened. The cowboy glanced back toward the trail, where the outlaws were regrouping. He had only a moment to act, but he moved with confidence. With careful, practiced movements, he guided Leela toward a safer spot, a slight dip in the land that offered cover from the open plain. The outlaws could still see them, but it would be more difficult for them to attack directly. Leela felt herself being lowered gently to the ground, her body weak and trembling. Pain shot through her shoulder again, and she gasped, gripping the man's arm for support. I think I'm hit," she managed to whisper, her voice trembling. "I see it," he said quietly, examining the wound quickly but carefully. "You're going to be okay. We'll get you out of here." Leela tried to focus, to stay calm, but the adrenaline that had carried her this far began to fade. Her vision blurred, and the weight of what had just happened pressed down on her. She had been running for her life, fleeing from danger she could barely comprehend, and now she was lying on the dirt, her body shaking, unsure if she could take another step. The cowboy acted with quick efficiency. He loosened the strap of her bag, helping her remove it so it would not weigh her down. He kept one arm around her for support, moving carefully toward a small grove of thicker trees a short distance away. "Stay with me," he said, his tone firm but reassuring. "You've done enough for today." Leela clung to his arm, her trust in him growing with every careful step. She had never met anyone like this before, a stranger who had appeared at the right moment, whose presence alone made her feel protected. There was a strange comfort in knowing that someone else was taking charge, even as her mind tried to process the chaos that had unfolded moments before. As they moved, Leela's thoughts drifted to the outlaws. She wondered if they would follow, if they would come after her again. The fear that had driven her to run was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but it was mixed now with a cautious hope. Perhaps she would survive this encounter. Perhaps she would live to see the end of this terrifying morning. The cowboy finally found a relatively flat spot among the trees, where the shade offered some relief from the scorching sun. He gently laid Leela down, careful not to aggravate her shoulder. The pain was sharp, but she gritted her teeth, unwilling to cry out. She had learned from her parents that strength was not just physical, it was mental, a quiet determination to endure even when the world seemed cruel. "Can you move your arm?" the cowboy asked, his voice calm but firm. Leela tried, wincing, and nodded. I think so," she whispered. "Good," he said. "Just stay still. I need to make sure you're steady before we do anything else." He pulled out a small piece of cloth from his bag and began to carefully bind the wound, applying pressure to slow the bleeding. Leela felt the sting, but also a strange sense of security. She was alive, and for the first time since the chase had begun, she felt a glimmer of hope. As the immediate danger passed, Leela began to notice the small details around her. The rustle of leaves in the breeze, the soft sounds of Daisy moving nearby, and the quiet determination of the man who had saved her. She realized that life could change in an instant, that safety could disappear without warning, and that courage often came in the form of unexpected strangers. "You'll be fine," the cowboy said again, meeting her gaze. "I've seen worse than this, and people have survived." Leela nodded weakly, her gratitude overwhelming. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The cowboy didn't respond immediately. He was alert, scanning the area for any signs of the outlaws returning. Leela realized then that his calmness wasn't just confidence, it was experience. He knew how to handle danger, and he was protecting her. She felt a deep respect for him, a quiet awe at the strength and courage he carried. For several minutes they stayed in that small grove, the sounds of the world continuing around them. The outlaws had not followed, perhaps deterred by the presence of someone who could match them, or perhaps biding their time. Leela allowed herself a small sigh of relief. She had survived the chase, had been saved at the last possible moment, and had learned something important. Life was fragile, and courage could appear in the most unexpected ways. As the adrenaline faded further, Leela began to shiver. The cowboy noticed and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, pulling her close to protect her from the chill. She felt a strange comfort in the warmth, in the quiet presence of someone who had risked everything to save her. It was a moment of calm after chaos, a moment she would remember forever. She thought of her parents back at the ranch, of Daisy waiting patiently nearby, and of the life she had known before this terrifying day. Nothing would ever feel quite the same again. The world was bigger, scarier, and more unpredictable than she had imagined. But it was also filled with moments of heroism, kindness, and courage. And for now, she was safe, thanks to a cowboy who had appeared when she needed him most. The sun had climbed high above Red Rock by the time Leela was safely carried from the grove. The cowboy moved with careful precision, keeping her close to his chest as they walked toward a small homestead he had spotted nearby. Every step was deliberate, making sure that Leela's injured shoulder did not jostle too much and that she remained stable. Daisy followed behind, her hooves stirring up the dry dirt, nuzzling gently at Leela's side, as if understanding the danger was over. By the time they reached the homestead, Leela's body was trembling with exhaustion. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, and her skin was pale from shock. The cowboy knocked firmly on the wooden door. A woman answered, eyes widening as she saw Leela cradled in his arms, blood staining her shirt. Without a word, the woman stepped aside, guiding them inside. The interior of the homestead smelled of fresh bread and herbs, warm and familiar, a stark contrast to the chaos outside. Leela was laid gently on a wooden cot, and the woman began to clean the wound carefully. The cowboy stayed close, his presence a quiet assurance that she was not alone. Leela's breathing slowed slightly as she felt safe, protected by strangers who had suddenly become her allies. The woman worked with steady hands, cleaning the cut and bandaging it as best she could with the supplies available. Leela winced occasionally, the pain sharp but manageable. She focused on her breathing, remembering lessons her parents had taught her about staying calm in difficult situations. The cowboy's eyes never left the doorway, alert to any sign of returning danger, but there was a subtle softness in his gaze as he looked at her now. Neighbors began to gather outside, drawn by the commotion. They whispered to each other, curious and concerned. The town of Red Rock was small, and news traveled fast. Soon the story spread. A young woman had been attacked on the trail, and a cowboy had saved her life. People peeked through windows and doors, marveling at the bravery and timing of the rescue. Leela lay on the cot, exhausted and weak, but aware of the attention around her. She felt a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment, grateful for the help but overwhelmed by the sudden spotlight on her life. She had always been cautious, careful not to draw unnecessary attention, but fate had other plans. The town would remember this day, and so would she. The cowboy spoke quietly to the woman tending to her. "She'll need rest and care. Keep her comfortable, and I'll make sure she's not disturbed." Leela caught his words and felt a sense of relief wash over her. He was still protecting her, still ensuring her safety even after the immediate threat had passed. Hours passed, and the pain in Leela's shoulder began to dull slightly. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a heavy exhaustion that settled into her bones. She closed her eyes, allowing herself a brief moment of rest, trusting that the world outside would remain at bay for a little while longer. The cowboy remained nearby, keeping watch as the woman went about her tasks, and Leela felt a strange comfort in his quiet presence. When she finally opened her eyes, the sun was beginning to lower in the sky, casting a warm, golden glow across the room. The homestead was quiet, peaceful, and Leela allowed herself to breathe more deeply. She thought about what had happened, the chase, the gunshot, and the moment she had been caught before hitting the ground. It all felt surreal, as if she were remembering a dream that had been frighteningly real. The cowboy knelt beside her cot. "You're going to be okay," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I've seen worse than this, and people have survived. You're strong more than you know." Leela managed a weak smile, her gratitude evident even through the exhaustion. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what I would have done without you." He gave a small nod. "You don't have to think about that now. Focus on getting better. The rest will come later." As the evening wore on, neighbors brought food and supplies, checking to see that Leela had everything she needed. The town's concern was genuine, their admiration for the cowboy evident in the way they spoke quietly to each other. Leela listened, absorbing the atmosphere, realizing that even in a world filled with danger, there were people willing to step forward and help. By nightfall, Leela felt a measure of peace she had not known since the morning. The homestead was safe, her wound was tended to, and the cowboy remained vigilant. She thought about her family back at the ranch and knew they would soon arrive, worried and anxious. She would have to tell them everything, and though it was daunting, she felt ready. The events of the day had changed her, but they had also shown her the strength she possessed and the kindness of strangers in moments of need. As she drifted into a light sleep, Leela thought about Daisy, waiting patiently outside, and the cowboy who had risked everything to save her life. The day had been harrowing, frightening, and full of uncertainty, but it had also been a lesson in courage, trust, and the unexpected heroes who appear when least expected. The town of Red Rock would remember this day, but more importantly, Leela would remember it too. Not just for the fear, but for the strength, the bravery, and the moment when a life was saved by someone who appeared just in time, turning despair into hope. Days passed slowly after the terrifying morning that had changed Leela Thompson's life forever. She remained in the small homestead, cared for by the kind woman who had tended to her when the cowboy had brought her to safety. The pain in her shoulder had started to ease, though a dull ache remained as a reminder of what had happened. Leela had time now to think, to reflect on the events that had unfolded, and on the people who had intervened when she needed help most. She spent most of her hours resting on the wooden cot, her thoughts drifting between the frightening chase and the calm that had followed. Her family had arrived a day earlier, hurrying from the ranch after hearing the news. Her father had held her tightly, his strong arms steadying her as tears filled both their eyes. Her mother had fussed over her relentlessly, smoothing her hair, checking the bandages, and making sure she had enough food and water. The love of her parents was a warm, grounding presence, but even their comforting words could not erase the memory of the danger she had faced. Through it all, the cowboy remained nearby, though not in a way that demanded attention. He had introduced himself as Wyatt Callahan, a man who had spent years moving across the plains, helping those in need and always watching for trouble. He had been passing through Red Rock when he noticed Leela on the trail, and his instincts had told him something was wrong. Leela had barely time to process what had happened before he had appeared, saving her life with precise timing. She had thought about him constantly since that moment, both in gratitude and in awe. Wyatt's calm presence reassured her in ways she had not expected. He spoke little, letting his actions show his character. When he entered the room, he checked her shoulder, adjusted her bandages, and asked quietly if she needed anything. Leela had realized that sometimes words were not necessary. The simple act of being there, of showing concern, was enough. It was a lesson she would carry with her, one that showed that true strength often appeared quietly, without boasting or demand for recognition. The town of Red Rock slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but the story of the morning spread quickly. People whispered about Leela's courage in the face of danger and about Wyatt's bravery in saving her. Some spoke of the outlaws who had fled, fearing the arrival of someone capable of standing against them. Others marveled at the fact that a young woman alone on the trail had survived such a terrifying ordeal. Leela listened quietly, her pride mixed with disbelief. She had never considered herself a hero. She had only wanted to survive. Despite the attention, Leela focused on recovery. She practiced patience, allowing her shoulder to heal gradually under careful watch. Simple tasks like walking short distances and feeding Daisy became her daily exercises. The mare had been a constant companion through it all, offering comfort in her quiet, steady way. Leela found solace in their bond, realizing that courage was not only about facing danger, but also about maintaining trust and hope when the world seemed uncertain. Wyatt visited often, checking on her progress. Each visit reminded Leela of the fragile line between fear and safety. She would never forget how close she had come to disaster, how the slightest delay could have changed everything. But she also realized something more profound. Life was full of moments that demanded courage, moments when help could arrive from the most unexpected sources. Wyatt was that unexpected help, and his presence had given her a chance not only to survive, but to live with renewed understanding. As the days turned into weeks, Leela began to regain her strength. She returned to the ranch slowly, accompanied by Wyatt and her parents. The familiar sights of home, the wide-open fields, the animals grazing peacefully, the wooden fence posts casting long shadows in the late afternoon sun, brought a deep sense of comfort. The danger of that morning still lingered in her mind, but the familiarity of her surroundings reminded her that life continued, and she had the opportunity to rebuild and move forward. At the ranch, Leela resumed her daily work cautiously. She fed the animals, mended fences, and helped her parents in small ways, careful not to overexert herself. The physical labor was therapeutic in its own way, a method of reconnecting with the life she had before the incident. But more than physical recovery, Leela noticed a shift within herself. She had changed, not in ways that were immediately visible, but in how she approached the world. She was more aware, more cautious, but also more confident in her own abilities. Wyatt remained a quiet, steady presence, visiting occasionally to ensure her safety. The bond they had formed was not rushed or exaggerated. It was built on trust, respect, and the shared experience of facing danger together. Leela had learned that courage could be contagious. Seeing Wyatt's calm determination in the face of risk had inspired her, and she carried that inspiration with her as she navigated the challenges of daily life. Her family noticed the change too. Her father spoke of her growing strength, her mother of her resilience. Leela felt their pride, but she also knew that her journey had been deeply personal. She had confronted fear, faced the possibility of death, and survived. The experience had given her a new perspective on life, one that valued courage, awareness, and the kindness of strangers who intervene when the need is greatest. As the weeks passed, Leela also thought about the outlaws. The memory of their pursuit was a shadow in her mind, but it was no longer a source of constant fear. Instead, it became a reminder of how precious life could be and how quickly circumstances could change. She realized that while danger was real, so too was the opportunity for heroism, for courage, and for connection with others. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, Leela sat outside the ranch house. Daisy grazed nearby, the soft sounds of the animals' movements blending with the gentle rustle of the wind. Wyatt joined her, quietly sitting on the wooden fence, his presence calm and reassuring. They watched the sky together, the silence filled with unspoken understanding. "You're stronger than you realize," Wyatt said, finally breaking the quiet. "You survived because you didn't give up, because you trusted yourself." Leela smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting the colors of the sunset. "I learned from you too," she replied softly. "You showed me what it means to be calm and brave, even when everything seems hopeless." He nodded. "Sometimes it's not about fighting every battle yourself. It's about recognizing when to rely on others and when to trust your own instincts. You did both today and every day since." The words settled in her heart. Leela realized that her experience was more than a story of fear and survival. It was a lesson in resilience, courage, and human kindness. She had faced one of the most frightening moments of her life and emerged stronger, with a new appreciation for the world and the people in it. In the following months, life returned to a quiet rhythm at the ranch. Leela continued her daily work, tending to the animals and helping her parents, but she carried herself with a new sense of confidence. She knew that the world was unpredictable, that danger could appear without warning, but she also knew that she possessed the courage to face it. She had survived, and that survival had strengthened her in ways she could never have imagined. Wyatt continued to visit, offering advice and assistance when needed, but also allowing Leela her independence. Their bond grew quietly, built on respect and shared understanding rather than haste or expectation. Leela learned that true courage often appeared in subtle forms, through patience, observation, and careful action. She had learned that help could arrive unexpectedly, and that trust, once given wisely, could be life-saving. As the seasons changed and the landscape of red rock shifted from the warm tones of summer to the crisp chill of autumn, Leela reflected on the journey she had undergone. The memory of the chase, the gunshot, and the moment she had been caught before hitting the ground would always remain with her, but it no longer filled her with fear. Instead, it was a reminder of what she had overcome, a testament to her resilience, and a story she could carry with pride. She thought about her family, her home, Daisy, and the cowboy who had saved her. Each had played a role in her survival and recovery. Leela understood now that life was fragile, but it was also filled with moments of kindness, bravery, and hope. These moments defined the strength of the human spirit, and she felt grateful to have witnessed and been a part of them. By the time winter arrived, Leela had fully healed physically, though the memory of the incident remained vivid. She had grown in ways she could not have anticipated. Her confidence had deepened, her courage had strengthened, and her awareness of the world had sharpened. She had faced danger and survived, and in doing so had discovered the true depth of her own strength. And so, life continued at the Thompson Ranch. Leela rode Daisy across the fields, tended to the animals, and assisted her parents, all with a new sense of purpose. The memory of the terrifying morning lingered, but it no longer dominated her thoughts. Instead, it had become a source of reflection, a reminder of courage, resilience, and the extraordinary impact of human kindness when it arrived just in time. She had survived, and in surviving, she had discovered not only the strength within herself, but also the heroism that could exist in others. And for that, she was forever changed, forever grateful, and forever ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead.